Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Pransify podcast. Today is episode 2 of The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. Picking up where we left off at chapter 6, modern religion is objective. To give oneself religiously is a continuing operation expressed in a series of acts. It can be nothing else. You cannot dedicate yourself and then go away to live just as you have lived before. It is a poor travesty of religion that does not produce an essential change in the life which embraces it. But in the established and older religions of our race, this change of conduct has involved much self-abasement merely to the god or gods, or much self-mortification merely with a view to the moral perfecting of self. Christian devotion, for example, in the early stages before the hermit life gave place to organic monastic life, did not to any extent direct itself to service except the spiritual service of other human beings. But as Christianity became a definite social organizing force, it took on a great series of healing, comforting, helping, and educational activities. The modern tendency has been and is all in the direction of minimizing what one might call self-centered devotion and self-subjugation, and of expanding and developing external service. The idea of inner perfectibility dwindles with the diminishing importance attached to individuality. We cease to think of mortifying or exalting or perfecting ourselves and seek to lose ourselves in a greater life. We think less and less of conquering self and more of escaping from self. If we attempt to perfect ourselves in any respect, it is only as a soldier sharpens and polishes an essential weapon. One quickened apprehension of continuing change, our broader and fuller vision of the history of life, disabuse our minds of many limitations set to the imaginations of our predecessors. Much that they saw as fixed and determined, we see as transitory and controllable. They saw life fixed in its species and subjected to irrevocable laws. We see life struggling insecurely, but with a gathering successfulness for freedom and power against restriction and death. We see life coming at last to our tragic and hopeful human level. Unprecedented possibilities, mighty problems we realize confront mankind today. They frame our existences. The practical aspect, the material form, the embodiment of the modernized religious impulse is the direction of the whole life to the solution of these problems and the realization of their possibilities. The alternative before man now is either magnificence of spirit and magnificence of achievement or disaster. The modern religious life, like all forms of religious life, must needs have its own subtle and deeper inner activities, its meditations, its self-confrontations, its phases of stress and search and appeal, its serene and prayerful moods. But these inward aspects do not come into the scope of this present inquiry, which is concerned entirely with the outward shape. The direction and the organization of modern religious effort with the question of what, given religious devotion, we have to do and how that has to be done. Now, in the new and greater universe to which we are awakening, its immense possibilities furnish an entirely new frame and setting for the moral life. In the fixed and limited outlook of the past, practical good works took the form mainly of palliative measures against evils that were conceived of as incurable. The religious community nursed the sick, fed the hungry, provided sanctuary for the fugitive, pleaded with the powerful for mercy. It did not dream of preventing sickness, famine, or tyranny. Otherworldliness was its ready refuge from the invincible evil and confusion of the existing scheme of things. But it is possible not to imagine an order in human affairs from which these evils have been largely or entirely eliminated. More and more people are coming to realize that such an order is a material possibility. And with the realization that this is a material possibility, we can no longer be confident with the field of good deeds and right action, restricted to palliative and consolatory activities. Such things are merely first aid. The religious mind grows bolder than it has ever been before. It pushes through the curtain it once imagined was a barrier. It apprehends its larger obligations. The way in which our activities conduce to the realization of that conceivable better order in human affairs becomes a new criterion of conduct. Otherworldliness has become unnecessary. The realization of this possible better order brings us at once to certain definite lines of conduct. We have to make an end to war, and to make an end to war, we must be cosmopolitan in our politics. It is impossible for any clear-headed person to suppose that evermore destructive stupidities of war can be eliminated from human affairs until some common political control dominates the earth, and almost certain pressures due to the growth of population, due to the enlarging scope of economic operations, or due to conflicting standards of traditions of life are disposed of. To avoid the positive evils of war and to attain the new levels of prosperity and power that now come into view, an effective world control not merely of armed force, but of the production and made movements of stable commodities and the drift and expansion of population is required. It is absurd to dream of peace and worldwide progress without that much control. These things assured, the abilities and energies of a greatly increased proportion of human beings could be diverted to the happy activities of scientific research and creative work, with an ever-increasing release and enlargement of human possibility. On the political side, it is plain that our lives must be given to the advancement of that union. Such a forward stride in human life, the first stride in a mighty continuing advance, an advance to which no limit appears, is now not simply materially possible, it is urgent. The opportunity is plain before mankind. It is an alternative to social decay. But there is no certainty, no material necessity that it should ever be taken. It will not be taken by mankind inadvertently. It can only be taken through such an organization of will and energy to take it as this world has never seen before. These are the new imperatives that unfold themselves before the more alert minds of our generation. They will presently become the general mental background as the modern interpretations of the history of life and of the material and mental possibilities about us establish themselves. Evil political, social, and economic usages and arrangements may seem obdurate and huge, but they are neither permanent nor uncontrollable. They can be controlled, however, only by an effort more powerful in determining the instincts and inertias that sustain them. Religion, modern and disillusioned, has for its outward task to set itself to the control and direction of political, social, and economic life. If it does not do that, then it is no more than a drug for easing discomfort, the opium of the peoples. Can religion, or can it not, synthesize the needed effort to lift mankind out of our present disorders, dangerous baseness, frustrations, and futilities to a phase of relative security, accumulating knowledge, systematic and continuing growth and power, and the widespread deep happiness of hopeful and increasing life? Our answer here is that the religious spirit, in the light of modern knowledge, can do this thing, and our subject now is to inquire what are the necessary opening stages in the synthesis of this effort. We write from this point onward for those who believe that it can, and who do already grasp the implications of world history and contemporary scientific achievement. 7. What mankind has to do. Before we can consider the forms and methods of attacking this inevitable task of reconstruction, it will be well to draw the main lines and to attempt some measure of the magnitude of that task. What are the new forms that it is thus proposed to impose upon human life? And how are they to be evolved from or imposed upon the current forms? And against what passive and active restraints has this to be done? There can be no pause for replacement in the affairs of life. Day must follow day, and the common activities continue. The new world as a going concern must arise out of the old as a going concern. Now, the most comprehensive conception of this new world is one of politically, socially, and economically unified. Within that frame fall all the other ideas of our progressive ambition. To this end, we set our faces and seek to direct our lives. Many there are present who apprehend it as a possibility, but do not dare, it seems, to desire it, because of the enormous difficulties that intervene, and because they see as yet no intimations of a way through or around these difficulties. They do not see a way of escape from the patchwork of governments that grips them and divides mankind. The great majority of human beings have still to see the human adventure as one whole. They are obsessed by the air of permanence and finality in established things. They accept current reality as ultimate reality. As the saying goes, they take the world as they find it. But here we are writing for the modern-minded, and for them it is impossible to think of the world as secure and satisfactory until there exists a single world commonweal preventing war and controlling the moral, biological, and economic forces and wastages that would otherwise lead to wars, and controlling them in the sense that science and man's realization and control of his powers and possibilities continue to increase. Let us make clear what sort of government we are trying to substitute for the patchwork of today. It will be a new sort of direction with a new psychology. The method of direction of such a world commonweal is not likely to imitate the methods of existing sovereign states. It will be something new and altogether different. This point is not yet generally realized, is too often assumed, that the world commonweal will be, as it were, just the one heir and sole and survivor of existing states, and that it will be a sort of megatherium of the same form and anatomy of its predecessors. But a little reflection will show that this is a mistake. Existing states are primarily militant states, and a world state cannot be militant. There will be little need for a president or king to lead the marshaled hosts of humanity, for where there is no war, there is no need of any leader to lead hosts anywhere. And in a polyglot world, as a parliament or mankind or any sort of council that meets and talks is an inconceivable instrument of government, the voice will cease to be a suitable vehicle. World government, like scientific process, will be conducted by statement, criticism, and publication that will be capable of efficient translation. The fundamental organization of contemporary states is plainly still military, and that is exactly what a world organization cannot be. Flags, uniforms, national anthems, patriotism, sedulously cultivated in church and school, the brag, blare, and bluster of our competing sovereign states, belong to the phase of the development the open conspiracy will supersede. We have to get clear of that groups of the most interested, intelligent, and devoted people, and that their activities should be subject to a free, open, watchful criticism, restrained from making spasmodic interruptions, but powerful enough to modify or supersede without haste or delay whatever is weakening or unsatisfactory in the general direction. A number of readers will be disposed to say that this is a very vague, undefined, and complicated conception of world government. But indeed, it is a simplification. Not only are the present governments of the world a fragmentary, competing confusion, but none of them is as simple as it appears. They seem to be simple because they have formal heads and definite forms, councils, voting assemblies, and so forth, for arriving at decisions. But the formal head, the kings, presidents, and so forth, are really not the directive heads. They are merely the figureheads. They do not decide. They merely make gestures of potent and dignified acquiescence when decisions are put to them. They are complicating shams. Nor do the councils and assemblies really decide. They record, often very imperfectly and exasperatingly, the accumulating purpose of outer forces. These outer, really directive forces are no doubt very intricate in their operation. They depend finally on religious and educational forms and upon waves of gregarious feeling, but it does not in the least simplify the process of collective human activity to pretend that it is simple and to set up symbols and dummies in the guise of rulers and dictators to embody that pretense. To recognize the incurable intricacy of collective action is a mental simplification to remain satisfied with the pretensions of existing governmental institutions. And to bring in all the problems of their procedure and interaction is to complicate the question. The present rudimentary development of collective psychology obliges us to be vague and provisional about the way in which the collective mind may best define its will for the purpose of administrative action. We may know that a thing is possible and still be unable to do it as yet, just as we knew that aviation was possible in 1900. Some method of decision there must certainly be, and a definite administrative machinery. But it may turn out to be much slighter, less elaborate organization than a consideration of existing methods might lead us to imagine. It may never become one single interlocking administrative system. We may have systems of world control rather than a single world state. The practical regulations, enforcements, and officials needed to keep the world in good health, for example, may be very loosely related to the system of controls that will maintain its communications in a state of efficiency. Enforcement and legal decisions as we know them now may be found to be enormously and needlessly cumbrous by our descendants. As the reasonableness of a thing is made plain, the need for its enforcement is diminished, and the necessity for litigation disappears. The open conspiracy of the world governments for the supersession or enlargement of fusion of existing political, economic, and social institutions must necessarily, as it grows, draw closer and closer to questions of practical control. It is likely in its growth to incorporate many activities, public servants, and many industrial and financial leaders and directors. It may assimilate great masses of intelligent workers. As its activities spread, it will work out a whole system of special methods of cooperation. As it grows, and by growing, it will learn the business of general direction and how to develop its critical function. A lucid, dispassionate, and imminent criticism is the primary necessity, the living spirit of a world civilization. The open conspiracy is essentially such a criticism, and the carrying out of such a criticism into working reality is the task of the open conspiracy. It will be by its very nature aiming not so much to set up a world direction as to become itself a world direction, and then the educational militant forms of its opening phase will evoke step by step, as experience is gained and power and responsibility acquired, forms of administration and research and correlation. The difference in nature and function between the world controls of the future and the state governments of the present age, which you have just pointed out, favors a hope that the open conspiracy may come to its own in many cases rather than by fading out of these state governments through the inhabitants and inhibition and paralysis of their destructive militant and competitive activities than by a direct conflict to overthrow them. As new world controls develop, it becomes the supreme business of the open conspiracy to keep them worldwide and impartial, to save them by an incessant critical education and propagandistic activity from entanglement with the old traditional rivalries and feuds of states and nations. It is quite possible that such world control should be able to develop independently, but it is highly probable, on the other hand, that they will continue to be entangled as they are today, and that they will need to be disentangled with struggle. We repeat, the new directive organizations of men's affairs will not be of the same nature as old-fashioned governments. They will be in their nature biological, financial, and generally economic, and the old governments were primarily nothing of the sort. Their directive force will be, one, an effective criticism having the quality of science, and two, the growing will in men to have things set right. The directive force of the older governments was the uncriticized fantasies and willfulness of an individual, a clan, a tribe, or a majority. The modernization of the religious impulse leads us straight to this effort for the establishment of the world state as a duty, and the close consideration of the necessary organization of that effort will bring the reader to the conclusion that a moment aiming at the establishment of the world directorate, however restricted that movement may be at first in numbers and power, must either contemplate the prospect of itself developing into a world directorate, and by the designation and assimilation of superseded factors into an entire modern world community, or admit from the outset the futility, the spare time immatureness of its gesture. Chapter 8, Broad Characteristics of a Scientific World Commonwealth. Continuing our examination of the practical task before the modern mind, we may next note the main lines of contemporary aspiration within this comprehensive outline of a world commonwealth. Any sort of unification of human affairs will not serve the ends we seek. We aim at a particular sort of unification. A world Caesar is hardly better from the progressive point of view than world chaos. The unity we seek must be a worldwide liberation of thought, experiment, and creative effort. A successful open conspiracy merely to seize governments and wield and retain world power would be at best only the empty frame of success. It might be the exact reverse of success. Release from the threat of war and from the waste of international economic conflicts is a poor release if it demands as its price the loss of all other liberties. It is because we desire a unification of human direction, not simply for the sake of unity, but as a means of release to happiness and power, that it is necessary at any cost and delay and loss of effective force in strategic or tactical advantage that the light of free, abundant criticism should play upon that direction and upon the movements and unifying organizations, the leading to the establishment of that unifying direction. Man is an imperfect animal and never quite trustworthy in the dark. Neither morally nor intellectually is he safe from lapses. Most of us are past our first youth, know how little we can trust ourselves, and are glad to have our activities checked and guarded by a sense of helpful inspection. It is for this reason that a movement to realize the conceivable better state of the world must deny itself the advantages of secret methods and tactical insecurities. It must leave that to its adversaries. We must declare our end plainly from the outset and risk no misunderstanding of our procedure. The open conspiracy against the traditional and now cramping and dangerous institutions of the world must be an open conspiracy and cannot remain righteous otherwise. If it is lost, it goes underground. Every step to world unity must be taken in the daylight with the understanding sympathy of as many people as possible, or the sort of unity that will be won will be found to be scarcely worth the winning. The essential task would have to be recommended against within the frame of unity thus attained. This candid attempt to take possession of the whole world, this open conspiracy of ours, must be made in the name of and for the sake of science and creative activity. Its aim is to release science and creative activity in every stage, and the struggle must be watched and criticized, lest there be any sacrifice of these ends to the exigencies of conflict. The security of creative progress and creative activity implies a competent regulation of the economic life in the collective interest. There must be food, shelter, and leisure for all. The fundamental needs of the animal life must be assured before human life can have free play. Man does not live by bread alone. He eats that he may learn and adventure creatively. And unless he eats, he cannot adventure. His life is primarily economic, as housing is primarily a foundation, and economic justice and efficiency must underline all other activities. But to judge human activity and organize political and social activities entirely on economic grounds is to forget the objectives of life's campaign and preoccupation with supply. It is true that man, like the animal world in general, from which he has arisen, is the creature of struggle for sustenance. But unlike the animals, man can resort to methods of escape from the competitive pressure upon the means of subsistence, which has been the lot of every other animal species. He can restrain the increase in his numbers, and he seems capable of still quite undefined expansion of his productivity per head of population. He can escape, therefore, from the struggle of subsistence altogether with the surplus of energy such as no other kind of animal species has ever possessed. Intelligent control of population is a possibility which puts man outside competitive processes that have hitherto ruled the modification of species, and he can be released from the process in no other way. There is a clear hope that later directed breeding will come within the scope, but that goes beyond his present range of practical achievement, and we need not discuss it further here. Suffice it for us here that the world community of our desires, the organized world community conducting and ensuring its own progress, requires a deliberate collective control of population as a primary condition. There is no strong instinctive desire for multitudinous offspring as such in the feminine makeup. The reproductive impulses operate indirectly. Nature ensures a pressure of population through passions and instincts that, given sufficient knowledge, intelligence, and freedom on the part of women, can be satisfactorily gratified and tranquilized, if need be, without the production of numerous children. Very slight adjustments in social and economic arrangements will, in a world of clear, available knowledge and straightforward practice in these matters, supply sufficient inducement or discouragement to affect the child birth rate or the birth rate of specific types, as the directive sense of the community may consider desirable. So long as the majority of human beings are begotten individually in lust and ignorance, so long does man remain like any other animal under the molding pressure of competition for subsistence. Social and political processes cannot possess a change entirely in their character when they recognize the possibility and practicality of this fundamental revolution in human biology. In a world so relieved, the production of staple necessities presents a series of problems altogether less distressful than those of the present scramble for possessions and self-indulgence on the part of the successful, and for work and bare living on the part of the masses. With the increase of population unrestrained, there was, as the end of the economic process, no practical alternative to a multitudinous equality at the level of bare subsistence, except through such an inequality of economic arrangements as allowed a minority to maintain a higher standard of life by withholding whatever surplus of production it could grasp from consumption and mere proletariat breeding. In the past and at present, what is called the capitalist system, that is to say, the unsystematic exploitation of production by private owners, under the protection of the law, has, on the whole, in spite of much waste and conflict, worked beneficially by checking that gravitation to universal low-grade consumption, which would have been the inevitable outcome of a socialism oblivious of biological processes. With effective restraint upon the increase of population, however, entirely new possibilities open out before mankind. The besetting vice of economic science, orthodox and unorthodox alike, has been the vice of beginning in the air with current practice and current convictions, with questions of wages, prices, values, and possessions, when the profounder issue of human association are really not to be found at all on these levels. The primary issue of human association are biological and psychological, and the essentials of economics are problems in applied physics and chemistry. The first thing we should examine is what we want to do with natural resources, and the next, how to get men to do what has to be done as pleasurably and effectively as possible. Then we should have a standard by which to judge the methods of today. But the academic economists, and still more so Marx and his followers, refuse to deal with these fundamentals, and with a stupid pose of sound practical wisdom, insist on opening up their case with an uncritical acceptance of the common antagonism of employers and employed and long rigmarole about profits and wages. Ownership and expropriated labor are only one set of many possible sets of economic method. The economists, however, will attend seriously only to the current set. The rest they ignore. And the Marxists, with their uncontrollable disposition to use nicknames in the place of judgments, condemn all others as utopian. A word is final in its dismissal from the minds of the elect, as that other pet counter in the communist substitute for thought, bourgeoisie. If they can persuade themselves that an idea or statement is utopian or bourgeois, it does not seem to matter in the least to them whether it is right or wrong. It is disposed of. Just as in the gentler circles, anything is disposed of that can be called atheistical, subversive, or disloyal. If a century and a half ago the world had submitted its problems of transport to the economists, they would have put aside, with as little wasted breath and ink as possible, all talk about railways, motor cars, steamships, and airplanes, and with a fine sense of extravagance set themselves to long neurologic dissertations, disputations, and treatises upon high roads and the methods of connecting them, turnpike, gates, canals, influences of lock fees or bargemen, tidal landing places, anchorages, surplus carrying capacity carriers, caravans, game barrels, and the pedestrianariate. There would have been a rapid and easily differentiation in feeling and requirements between the horse-owning minority and the walking minority. The wrongs of the latter would have been tortured the mind of every philosopher who could not ride, and have been minimized by every philosopher who could. And there would have been a broad rift between the narrow footpath school, the no footpath school, and the school which would look forward to a time when every horse would have to be led along in one universal footpath under the dictatorship of the pedestrianariate, all with the profoundest gravity and dignity. These things, footpaths and roads and canals with their traffic, were real, and utopian projects for getting along at 30 or 40 miles an hour or more uphill against wind and tide, let alone the still more incredible suggestion of air transport, would have been smiled and sneered off court. Life went about on its with a certain assistance from wheels or floated road, and was blown about on water. So it had been, and so it would always be. The psychology of economic cooperation is still only dawning, and so the economists and the doctrinaire socialists have had the freest range for pedantry and authoritarian pomp. For 100 years, they have argued about rent, about surplus value, and so on, and have produced a literature 10,000 times as bulky, dreary, and foolish as the worst outpourings of the medieval schoolmen. But as soon as this time-honored preoccupation with the allotment of the shares of originators, organizers, workers, owners of material, credit dealers, and tax collectors in the total product ceases to be dealt with as the primary question in economics, as soon as we liberate our minds from preoccupation, which from the outset necessarily makes that science a squabble rather than a science, and begin our attack upon the subject with a survey of the machinery and other productive material required in order that the staple needs of mankind should be satisfied, if we go on from that to consider the way in which all this material and machinery can be worked and the product distributed with the least labor and the greatest possible satisfaction, we shift our treatment of economic questions towards standards by which all current methods of exploitation, employment, and finance can be judged rather than wrangled over. We can dismiss the question of the claims of this sort of participant or that for later and subordinate consolidation, and view each variety of human assistance in the general effort entirely from the standpoint of what makes the assistance least onerous and most effective. The germs of such really scientific economics exist already in the study of industrial organization and industrial psychology. As the science of industrial psychology in particular develops, we shall find all this discussion of ownership, profit, wages, finance, and accumulation, which has been treated hitherto as the primary issues of economics, falling into place under the larger inquiry of what conventions in these matters, what system of money, and what conceptions of property yield the greatest stimulus and the least friction in that worldwide system of cooperation, which must constitute the general economic basis to the activities of a unified mankind. Manifestly, the supreme direction of the complex of human economic activities in such a world must center upon a Bureau of Information and Advice, which will take account of all the resources of the planet, estimate current needs, apportion productive activities, and control distribution. Topographical and geographical surveys of modern civilized communities, their governmental maps, their periodic issue of agricultural and industrial statistics are the first crude and uncoordinated beginnings of such an economic world intelligence. In the propaganda work of David Lubin, a pioneer whom mankind must not forget, and in his International Institute of Agriculture in Rome, there were the beginnings of an impartial review month by month and year by year of world production. world needs and will transport, such a great central organization of economic science would necessarily produce direction. It would indicate what had best be done here, there, and everywhere, solve general tangles, examine, approve, and initiate fresh methods, and arrange the transitional process from old to new. It would not be an organization of will, imposing its will upon a reluctant or recalcitrant race. It would be a direction, just as a map is a direction. A map imposes no will on anyone, breaks no one to its policy, and yet we obey maps. The will to have the map full, accurate, and up to date, and the determination to have its indications respected would have to pervade the whole community. To nourish and sustain that will must be the task not of any particular social or economic division of the community, but of the whole body of right-minded people in that community. The organization and preservation of that power of will is the primary undertaking. Therefore, of a world revolution aiming at universal wealth, peace, welfare, and happy activity. Through that will, it will produce, as the central organ, the brain of the modern community, a great encyclopedic organization kept constantly up to date and giving approximate estimates and directions for all the material activities of mankind. The older and still prevalent conceptions of government as bullying is the breaking in and subjugation of the subject to the god or a king or lords of the community. Will bending, the overcoming of the recalcitrant junior and inferior, was an essential process in the establishment of primitive societies, and its traditional still rules our education and law. No doubt there must be a necessary accommodation of the normal human will to every form of society. No man is innately virtuous, but compulsion and restraint are the friction of the social machine, and other things being equal, the less compulsive social arrangement are, the more willingly, naturally, and easily they are accepted. The less wasteful of moral effort and the happier that community will be. The ideal state, other things being equal, is the state with the fewest possible number of wills fighting and will suppressions. This might be a primary consideration in arranging the economic, biological, and mental organization of the world community at which we aim. We have advanced the opinion that the control of population pressure is practical without any violent conflict with human nature, that given a proper atmosphere of knowledge and intention, there need be far less suppression of will in relation to production than prevails today. In the same way, it is possible that the general economic life of mankind may be made universally satisfactory, that there may be an abundance out of all comparison greater than the existing supply of the things necessary for human well-being, freedom, and activity, with not merely not more, but infinitely less subjugation and enslavement than now occurs. Man is still but half-born out of the blind struggle for existence, and his nature still partakes of the infinite wastefulness of his mother nature. He still has to learn how to price the commodities he covets in terms of human life. He is indeed only beginning to realize that there is anything to be learned in that matter. He wastes will and human possibility extravagantly in the current economic methods. We know nowadays that the 19th century expended a great wealth of intelligence upon a barren controversy between individualism and socialism. They were treated as mutually exclusive alternatives instead of being questions of degree. Human society has been and always will be an intricate system of adjustments between unconditional liberty and the disciplines and subordinations of cooperative enterprise. Affairs do not move simply from a more individualist to a more socialist state or vice versa. They may be a release of individual initiative going on here and standardization or restraint increasing there. Personal property never can be socially guaranteed as the extreme or individualist desired, nor can it be abolished as the extreme or socialist proposed. Property is not robbery, as Proudhon asserted, and is the protection of the things against promiscuous and mainly wasteful use. Property is not necessarily personal. In some cases, property may restrict or forbid a use of things that could be generally advantageous, and it may be, and is frequently unfair in its assignment of initiative. But the remedy for that is not an abolition, but a revision of property. In the concrete, it is a form necessary for liberty of action upon material, while abstracted as money, which is a liquidated, generalized form of property. It is a ticket for individual liberty of movement and individual choice of reward. The economic history of mankind is a history of the operation of the idea of property. It relates the conflict of the unlimited acquisitiveness of egoistic individuals against the resentment of the disinherited and unsuccessful, and the far less effective consciousness of a general welfare. Money grew out of a system of abstracting conventions It has been subjected to a great variety of restrictions, monopolizations, and regulations. It has never been an altogether logical device, and it has permitted the most extensive and complex developments of credit, debt, and dispossession. All these developments have brought with them characteristic forms of misuse and corruption. The story is intricate, and the tangle of relationships, of dependence, of pressure, of interception, of misdirected services, crippling embarrassments, and crushing obligations in which we live today admits of no such simple and general solutions as many exponents of socialism, for example, seem to consider possible. But the thought and investigations of the past century or so have made it clear that a classification of property according to the nature of the rights exercisable and according to the range of ownership involved must be the basis for any system of social justice in the future. Current things, the ocean, the air, rare wild animals, must be the collective property of all mankind and cannot be altogether safe until they are so regarded and until some concrete body exists to exercise these proprietary rights. Whatever collective control exists must protect these universal proprieties. The sea from derelicts, the strange shy things of the wild from extermination by their hunter and the foolish collector. The extinction of many beautiful creatures is one of the penalties our world is paying for its sluggishness in developing a collective common rule. And there are many staple things and general needs that now also demand a unified control in the common interest. The raw material of the earth should be for all, not to be monopolized by any acquisitive individual or acquisitive sovereign state, and not to be withheld from exploitation for the general benefit of any chance claims to territorial propriety or priority of this or that backward or bargaining person or tribe. In the past, most of these universal concerns have had to be left to the competitive enterprise of profit-seeking individuals because there was as yet no collectivities organized to the pitch of ability needed to develop and control these concerns. But sure, nobody in his senses believes the supply and distribution of staple commodities about the earth by irresponsible persons and companies working entirely for monetary gain is the best possible method from the point of view of the race as a whole. The land of the earth, all utilizable natural products have fallen very largely under the rules and usages of personal property because in the past, that was the only recognized and practicable form of administrative proprietorship. The development both of extensive propriety companies and of governmental departments with economic functions have been a matter of the last few centuries. The development, that is to say, of communal, more or less impersonal ownership, and it is only through these developments that the idea of organized collectivity and proprietorship has become credible. Even in quite modern state enterprises, there is a tendency to recall the role of the vigilant, jealous, and primitive personal proprietor in the fiction of ownership by His Majesty the King. In Great Britain, for example, Georgius Rex is still dimly supposed to hover over the Postmaster General of his post office, approve, disapprove, and call him to account. But the Postal Union of the world, which steers a registered letter from Chile to Norway or from Ireland to Pekin, is almost completely divorced from the convention of an individual owner. It works. It is criticized without awe or malice, except for the stealing and steaming of letters practiced by political police of various countries. It works fairly well. And the whole force behind it is to keep it working well is a conscious, common sense of mankind. But when we have stipulated for the replacement of individual private ownership by a more highly organized forms of collective ownership, subject to free criticism and responsible to the whole republic of mankind, and the general control of sea and land, the getting preparation and distribution of staple products, and in transport, we have really named all the possible generalizations of concrete ownership that the most socialistic of contemporaries will be disposed to demand. And if we add to the necessary maintenance of a money system by a central world authority upon a basis that will make money keep faith with the worker who earns it, and represents from first to last for him the value in staple commodities he was given to understand it was to have, and if we conceive credit adequately controlling in the general interest by a socialized world banking organization, we shall have defined the entire realm from which individual property and unrestricted individual enterprise have been excluded. Beyond that, the science of social psychology will probably assure us that the best work will be done for the world by individuals free to exploit their abilities as they wish. If the individual landowner or mine owner disappears altogether from the world, he will probably be replaced over large areas by tenants with considerable security of tenure by householders and by licensees under collective proprietors. It will be the recognized best course to allow the cultivator to profit as fully as possible by his own individual productivity and to leave the householder to fashion his home and garden after his own desire. Such is the very broadest terms in the character of the world commonwealth towards which the modern imagination is moving, so far as its direction and economic life are concerned. The organization of collective bodies capable of exercising those wider proprietorships which cannot be properly used in the common interest by uncorrelated individuals is the positive practical problem for the intelligent portion of mankind today. The nature of such collective bodies is still a series of open questions, even upon such points as whether they will be elected bodies or groups deriving their authority from other sanctions. Their scope and methods of operation, their relations to one another and to the Central Bureau of Intelligence remain also to be defined. But before we conclude this essay, we must be able to find precisions for at least the beginning of such a definition. 19th century socialism in its various forms, including highly indurated formula of communism, have been a series of projects for the establishment of such collective controls, for the most part very sketchy projects from which the necessary factor of a sound psychological analysis was almost completely wanting. Primarily movements of protest and revolt against the blazing injustices arising out of the selfishly individualistic exploitation of the new and more productive technical and financial methods of the 18th and 19th centuries, they have been apt to go beyond the limits of reasonable socialization in their demands and to minimize absurdly the difficulties and dangers of a collective control. Indignation and impatience were the ruling moods, and if they constructed little, they exposed much. We are better able to measure the magnitude of the task before us because of the clearances and lessons achieved by these pioneer movements. Chapter 9. No stable utopia is now conceivable. This unified world towards which the open conspiracy would direct its activities cannot be pictured for the readers as any static and stereotyped spectacle of happiness. Indeed, one may doubt if such a thing as happiness is possible without steadily changing conditions involving continually enlarging and accelerating opportunities. Mankind, released from the pressures of population, the waste of warfare, and the private monopolization of the sources of wealth, will face the universe with a great and increasing surplus of will and energy. Change and novelty will be the order of life. Each day will differ from its predecessor, and its great amplitude of interest. Life, which was once routine, endurance, and mischance, will become adventure and discovery. It will no longer be the old story. We have still barely emerged from among the animals in the struggle for existence. We live only in the early dawn of human self-consciousness, and in the first awakening of the spirit of mastery. We believe that the persistent exploration of our outward and inward worlds by scientific and artistic endeavor will lead to developments of power and activity upon which at present we can set no limits nor give any certain form. Our antagonists are confusion of mind, want of courage, want of curiosity, want of imagination, indolence, and spendthrift egotism. These are the enemies against which the open conspiracy arrays itself. These are the jailers of human freedom and achievement. All right, so that's all we got for today. We will leave off at chapter 10, and we'll pick up at this time next Tuesday. We have in the chat Cyber Chuddin, International Affairs, Hashima Wan, 3D Cow, and Corbin. Hello. Hashima Wan, Todd is an excellent academic. Todd reads with fluency. I admire that. Well, thank you. Thank you, Hashim. And so make sure to tune in next Tuesday, everybody, for picking up at chapter 10. This is Todd Lewis, Praise of Folly Podcast, signing off.